continue to cross into Bangladesh, fleeing violence in Myanmar. We've investigated one particularly brutal attack on one village on one day in August. That's Our World, the massacre at Tulatoli, with me, Gabriel Gatehouse, on BBC World News.
Global business news from the boardroom or grassroots. Aaron Heslehurst cuts through the jargon with live reaction from Wall Street and Asia, studio interviews with top CEOs and the latest innovations in technology. Talking business on BBC World News.
That's the bell ringing on Wall Street, and it means the US markets are open. Hello, we are live around the world, and it's time for all the business news that matters. I'm Ben Bland, and this is Talking Business. Let's take a look at the headlines. Top story, Uber reveals that hackers got hold of the personal details of 57 million customers and drivers. In the latest embarrassment for the ride-hailing app, it paid the hackers to delete the data and keep quiet. The US and UK authorities are already investigating. We'll be hearing from one expert who says Uber's actions are a wake-up call to all major companies. Also coming up in the programme, Microsoft says it's trying to redial its Skype connection to China after the authorities forced its closure. We've also got the very latest on the global markets and the dining do's and don'ts, with more and more young professionals being sent for etiquette lessons on corporate hospitality. We'll tell you exactly how to make a good impression. That's all to come on this edition of Talking Business. Hello and a very warm welcome to the programme wherever in the world you are watching. The ride-hailing app Uber has revealed details of a huge hack affecting its customers and drivers around the world. The company says the names, email addresses and mobile phone numbers of 57 million customers and drivers were stolen. The San Francisco-based company says it paid the hackers $100,000 to delete the data, which they got hold of in October last year. The new boss, Dara Khosrowshahi, who took over in August, said none of this should have happened, and I will not make excuses for it. But it's just one more problem for him to deal with, alongside the fight for its licence in London, a lawsuit over self-driving cars, and the departure of several key executives. Let's get rid of the cube. Uber has been pretty resilient over some recent scandals, but the question is this time any different, and can it bounce back? Ian Mann is a leading cybersecurity expert and founder of UK cybersecurity firm ECSC, which advises 10% of FTSE 100 companies. Joins us from Leeds in the north of England. Ian, good to see you. So it seems with this, the biggest wrongdoing was not the fact they were hacked, but the fact they didn't come clean about it.
Yeah, being a US company and with data in the US, there's actually federal regulations and state regulations that you have to report breaches to both the authorities and customers. So very simply, they've broken the law by not reporting these breaches. And similar regulations come into effect in Europe from May next year, which is why this is a wake-up call for organisations that they really can no longer keep these sorts of breaches secret.
Ian, we'll come on to the bigger sort of corporate issues for companies, but one thing that colleagues here have been asking me, and everyone will want to know, is if they're worried about their details potentially being hacked in all of this, what should they do?
Yeah, there's very little you can do about data that's been lost, but one of the main things when you hear of an organisation getting hacked is to remember that it's possible that your login details and passwords could have been compromised. And if you're using the same login details, same email and password for other things such as Amazon, eBay, PayPal, or even your online banking, then it's really important that you change those passwords. So you should really not use the same password for multiple systems, and if you do hear about somebody like Uber getting compromised, your passwords are at risk. So if you use the same password somewhere else, then change that immediately so that if anyone's got hold of that data, they can't use that to do something else against you.
And do you think there'll be some other companies sitting a little uneasy after all this has come to light? Because what we're hearing is that Uber could face multiple investigations and potentially multiple fines and possibly even prosecutions.
Yeah, absolutely. They're operating in the US, where you have a legal obligation to report breaches. Similar regulations are heading into Europe next year. And companies traditionally do try to keep these things secret. Of course, paying hackers is particularly risky. You never know if the hackers are going to ask for more money. You've no promise and direct assurance that the data has been deleted and won't be sold. So their strategy was really quite risky, of both trying to hide this and also to pay hackers.
And I suppose in this day and age, you know, for a tech company, it seems incredibly naive to think that this wouldn't at some point all come out.
Yeah, especially because they've actually been fined previously for a security breach. So they were fined in New York in 2014 for a security breach then. So even having been fined previously for a breach, they've still not tightened up their security. And the technical details that are emerging show that they've had some lax security. So the hackers didn't need to do anything too sophisticated to breach their security. So they've got a lot of questions they'll need to answer.
Ian, we've seen Uber go through various scandals, including previous data issues. We've seen other big tech companies suffer big hacks like this. Do you think a company like Uber can bounce back from this kind of security breach, or is this somehow different this time round?
I think this is going to be very embarrassing for Uber, and they will probably face very large fines. Uber, though, in quite a privileged position that in many places they are pretty much a monopoly in terms of the service they provide. So people do like the convenience of Uber, but they really have to show now that they can do the right thing and fully disclose and cooperate with authorities. And there's an opportunity with a new CEO for them to do that and really start to scratch.
OK, we'll watch every twist and turn with interest. Ian Mann there from ECSC. Thank you very much indeed. Right, I don't know how you make calls, perhaps through WhatsApp audio, perhaps FaceTime audio, perhaps Skype. Well, we're going to turn our attention to Skype because the internet calling and messaging service is the latest one to fall foul of Chinese regulators. They forced its removal from Apple and Android app stores in the country. The authorities are stepping up their monitoring of communications. Skype's owner Microsoft says it is working to get the service back up and running, as our correspondent Stephen McDonnell reports now from Beijing.
So Chinese officials have decided to try and prevent their citizens from accessing Skype. This follows similar moves in recent times with WhatsApp and other communications apps. What this is about is trying to rein in use of any communication platforms not fully controlled by the Communist Party. In the case of Skype, the blocking occurs by pressuring companies into removing it from their app stores, and this applies to Apple and also Android services. It's a similar motivation which led to the blocking of, for example, Twitter and Facebook here for years. Now, there was a time here when people used to think that Skype was a safe way to communicate away from the prying eyes and ears of Chinese officials. I'm not sure how misplaced that view really has been, though. Either way, Skype's owners, Microsoft, say they're working hard to get the service back up and running in China. Now, the problem with that is the only way they're going to be able to do that officially is to allow Chinese censors, Chinese officials, to listen in on Skype communications. I'm not sure what Skype users will think of that, and I'm also not sure what sort of an impact that might have on Skype's international reputation.
Stephen McDonnell there. Let's round up some other business news for you now, and we'll stick with China because that is where the tech giant Apple says it is stopping some students from working illegal overtime at one of its suppliers' factories in China. The teenagers had volunteered for the extra hours at Foxconn and were being paid, but that was in breach of local laws. The UK Finance Minister, Philip Hammond, has set out the government's economic and spending plans in his autumn budget. He warned that growth will slow to 1.5% this year compared with the previous forecast of 2%. He also said he's setting aside a further $4 billion to prepare for the country's departure from the European Union. And US jobs figures now. The number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits fell last week to 239,000. Signalling steady job growth after recent Hurricane-related disruptions. Benefit claims had risen in recent weeks due to a backlog of people claiming in Puerto Rico after Hurricanes Irma and Maria. Right, let's take a look at how the markets are doing. We'll start with the FTSE 100 in London, and it is high by almost 0.5%. It rose before the finance minister delivered his budget, and it's maintained those gains. The pound also steady, hardly moving today against the dollar and the euro. The Frankfurt DAX has been fairly flat throughout the day so far, down just a shade. Investors a bit cautious still after the talks to form a coalition in Germany collapsed at the weekend. To Asia, the Hang Seng Asian markets moved higher. Hong Kong's index added around almost 1% to vault past the 30,000 point level for the first time in 10 years. That bullishness coming from strong performing tech shares like Tencent. We spoke about that yesterday on the programme. And oil prices are approaching a 2.5-year high. Brent crude is up. It's after OPEC looks like it'll try to extend its production cut. US crude also climbing. Investors, I suppose, will be watching to see if that filters through to the big energy company shares on Wall Street a little later. Let's get rid of the cube for now. Now, we've been talking about Zimbabwe quite a lot this week. Big political changes. And of course, when there are big political changes, big economic changes can often also follow. In Zimbabwe, things are beginning to emerge after Robert Mugabe's resignation on Tuesday. His former deputy, Emerson Mnangagwa, is going to be sworn in as president on Friday. The question is, what will it take to return the country to its former glory as one of Africa's most prosperous? Dr. Charles Laurie is head of country risk for Zimbabwe at the global risk consultancy Verisk Maplecroft. Charles, welcome to Talking Business. So, Robert Mugabe's gone. Emerson Mnangagwa is about to be signed in. Does this mean sanctions imposed by the US and other countries will be lifted? And if so, when?
I think it's too early to say whether those sanctions will be lifted. I think it's important to clarify what these sanctions are even about. These are not sanctions against the country of Zimbabwe. These are sanctions against individuals. They have backfired massively against the West. I don't think Western governments will be looking to cling to them for any longer than they absolutely have to. At the same time, Emerson Mnangagwa, when he comes in as president, comes in as a hardliner from Mugabe's former government. And I think the West will play it very carefully and very cautiously, but there will be the sentiment to lift those sanctions at the appropriate time.
It's interesting you say that, because I've heard mentioned several times amid the euphoria on the streets that we've seen among many people that some businesses see Zimbabwe as now a massive opportunity. And I just wonder how quickly will they pile in, and to what extent will they hold back and wait and see exactly what kind of interim president, or indeed longer-term president, Emerson Mnangagwa is going to be?
As far as the business community is concerned, Mugabe's regime was like an atom bomb. The business community has been absolutely decimated. So the number one most important step to reconstructing the business community is the removal of Mr. Mugabe, and that has now occurred. So I think you're going to see great euphoria. You're going to see tremendous interest in Zimbabwe. It brings a lot of positive attributes for business. But at the same time, you're starting from a low base. Businesses will be asking a lot of questions, and I think the most important element they're looking to see is what kind of a president would Mr. Mnangagwa be like?
One of the perhaps most repeated mantras on business programs is businesses like certainty, they don't like uncertainty. Given that is the case, we're not going to get certainty in Zimbabwe for quite some time, are we? Elections aren't until next September at the earliest, and we still have no idea so what shape the future government is going to take. So what can they do to reassure businesses that it is safe to invest and Zimbabwe is now open for business?
I think one has to remember that the former government operated on a regime that was bent on polarizing the business community, bent on polarizing Zimbabwe as a country. And this is very bad for business. And I think that Mr. Mnangagwa could do some very basic steps, could take some easy steps to reassure the West, to reassure the business community, to say that even if it's too early to take concrete steps, the sentiment will be to bring assurance and to bring stability to the business community.
OK, Charles Laurie, thanks very much indeed for that analysis there. Thank you. Right, it's time to have a look at what's trending online in the business world. It's that part of the programme. Bloomberg has been crunching the numbers and has worked out that Tesla which is yet to make a profit, is burning through $480,000 every hour. Despite that, though, Tesla's share price values it at more than Ford. The Times reports on the case of a lawyer suing Oxford University for not giving him a good enough grade. Faiz Siddiqui wants $1.3 million in damages and says his 2-1 degree scuppered his ambitions of becoming a high-earning lawyer. I got a 2-1 and I think I'm doing all right. And finally, the Washington Post has a great article about how smart assistants are now proving to be just as much of a challenge for parents as smartphones and tablets, with children learning their names before those of their parents. Simple solution. Change your name to Alexa, then your child will know who you are. Coming up, we're getting a taste for fancy dining as more young professionals are sent for tips on how to behave when eating with clients. This expert will tell us all of the key do's and don'ts of corporate hospitality.
Britain is leaving the European Union. Talks are underway, but what will Brexit mean for the rest of the world?
In Asia, companies that have invested in the UK are wondering whether they have to rethink their strategy and move their money and their factories elsewhere.
Who will benefit? Europe's governments are lobbying hard to win their business.
African exporters also sense an opportunity as the UK tours the world looking for new trading partners.
President Trump has already said he'd strike a quick deal with Britain, but hasn't said what he wants in return.
India sees more advantage in taking its time. A good agreement on trade, it says, is better than a rushed one. But does it risk on missing out?
Brexit will bring change around the world, but here in the UK, the debate goes on. Will leaving the EU prove a smart business move?
Business on the BBC. Make the connection.
Hello, you're watching Talking Business with me, Ben Bland. Our top story, the ride-hailing app Uber says it covered up a data hack which saw the personal details of 57 million customers and drivers stolen. The US and UK authorities are investigating. Now, I don't know how much you pay for your morning coffee. You probably think it's too much, but for most of us, $5 or $6 would be plenty. But one cafe in Singapore is hoping some people will fork out $60. Yeah, $60 for a single cup. So just why is it so special?
This coffee, it's Panama Geisha, a crop where it's scored 94.11, which is the highest score ever in the world. This coffee, it's auctioned at $601 per pound. For the bouquet and the notes of interesting flavors of peaches, lychees, and jasmine, which is rarely found in a natural product.
The maximum I would pay for Starbucks coffee is $5 to $6. Beyond that, I think it's cutthroat price here.
For wine and all that, there's a bit more work and more studies and more appreciation to that than coffee, I guess. Yeah.
The answer to that from me is absolutely not. And if you do pay it, make sure you make it last. Now, have you ever been out for a business dinner and not been sure which wine glass you should be using or where to put your elbows? Well, it seems you are not alone. A growing number of young professionals are being sent to dining etiquette coaches as companies realise some of their younger staff may need a few tips. Rupert Weston is the Academy Director at the Etiquette Experts, Debrett's. First tip, get the name of the company right, I suppose. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
So, why is it a problem then? Where are people going wrong? What's the biggest faux pas people make at business dining?
Interestingly enough, the biggest faux pas might surprise you. It's one that is universal, and it's people taking their mobile phones out and not paying attention to the person who they're having dinner with. And don't forget, a lot of these dinners are about building trust, building relationships, and creating a foundation for more and more business deals. So to actually get your phone out and focus on something else rather is not helping to build that relationship.
Well, even if they ask you a question that you have to look something up, you'd be better off saying, I'll look it up later and get back to you.
I think that's always better. I think as soon as you keep the phone out of it as best you can.
Right, let me give you some real-life examples, just put you on the spot a little. Supposing we're going out for lunch. I think it's a casual just catch-up. You're thinking it's something more formal. You turn up looking very suave in your tie and pocket square. I turn up like this, no tie, open-neck shirt, not all the way down, though. What should I do? Should I quickly find a tie? Do I apologise? Or do I just, you know, pretend I planned this all along?
Well, don't worry, is the first thing. You have come as you are, and you can, as some people say, just style it out. I mean, in this day and age, who says you have to wear a tie for a particular occasion? If it's at a club, then perhaps the club might insist on a tie, but that's pretty unusual in this day and age. My advice would be, perhaps if you're really that concerned, you could apologise and say, I hadn't realised it's that formal. But if I'm the one who's invited you to somewhere formal and I've neglected to tell you that it's somewhere formal, then, of course, the error is entirely on my part.
Now, on a global level, there can be lots of different cultural sensitivities at business lunches and dinners. What's the best way to, to avoid making a cultural faux pas?
Yeah, we're finding that we're doing so much more work globally now, and the one piece of advice that I would give to people is to look around and see what other people do. Don't be the first to do anything unless somebody asks you to do something. So don't be the first to start eating, wait till everybody else has got their food, which again is a good universal principle. And again, actually, if you want any more advice on multicultural aspects, then just ask people. People love talking about their own culture. They love talking about why they do the things that they do. So, of course, just ask. It's a great way to start a conversation.
OK, Rupert, thanks very much for talking us through that. I have mentally taken all notes of what you've said. Rupert Wesson from Debrett's there. Just for a quick a chance to look at the US markets. This is how Wall Street's main indices look. Opened a little changed on Wednesday. The Nasdaq, though, hitting another record high. That's how they look. You can follow those on the Business News website. That's it from Talking Business. We'll be back again soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Since 1992, we have been growing more than 20% a year. Today, we are a global leader, and we are not only providing equipment, we are maintainers in the field. We are providing software, overarching software from beginning to end. Today, we are a little bit more than 5,000 employees, and our turnover is around 1 billion. Innovation has always been in the DNA for Marel. We invest 6% of our revenues in innovation.
This machine is a perfect example of how we're changing the way food is processed in the world. When you bring a machine like this to the market, you need to understand the technology you have to offer, and you need to understand the market in which you're developing for. That's why we made this machine in a close partnership with our customer.
Each machine can take around 50 fillets per minute. The machine has already been programmed to cut in certain ways, certain sizes of fillets, so it will make the decision how the cut will be, and therefore maximize the value that we get of every single fillet. Our goal is that this machine will increase value by 10 to 15% of each fillet. We have more than doubled the throughput in the factory, so the cost per kilo has dropped drastically.
In recent years, we have used a strategic acquisition as well to stimulate the growth. Going forward,